A government is getting tough on foreign competitors. Politicians talk about protecting domestic industries. The message is clear. We're making other countries pay. It feels straightforward, almost satisfying. But that story falls apart the moment you look at how tariffs actually work in the real world. Because tariffs don't operate the way people think they do. They don't just hit foreign companies. They don't just protect domestic jobs. And they definitely don't stop at the border. Instead, they trigger a chain reaction. One that moves through corporations, supply chains, pricing strategies, and entire industries before quietly landing in the same place over and over again. Your wallet. And the most important part is this. You rarely notice it happening. To understand why, you have to start with the basic structure. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. If a product crosses into the country, the government can apply a percentage fee to it. That fee is collected at the border, usually when the importer brings the goods in. And right away, there's a misconception. Foreign companies don't pay tariffs directly. The importer does. In most cases, that importer is an American company, large retailers, manufacturers, distributors, or wholesalers. So the moment a tariff is imposed, the cost hits a domestic business first. And that creates a decision point. Absorb the cost or pass it on. Now, in theory, a company could absorb the cost, take the hit, reduce margins, keep prices stable. But in practice, that almost never happens, at least not for long. Because public companies are under constant pressure to maintain margins. Executives are judged on earnings. Shareholders expect growth. Quarterly reports don't tolerate sudden drops in profitability. So instead of absorbing the cost, companies adjust. They raise prices, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, sometimes immediately, sometimes gradually. But almost always they adjust. And this is where tariffs become invisible, because they don't show up on your receipt as a line item. You don't see tariff surcharge when you check out. You just see a slightly higher price than last year, or slightly smaller product for the same price, or a premium version that quietly replaces the old one. It's subtle, but across an entire economy, it's massive. Now zoom out one level. Because price increases are only the first order effect. What really matters is how corporations restructure around tariffs. Large companies don't just pass costs along, they optimize around them. They redesign supply chains, shift production between countries, route goods through different jurisdictions, reclassify products to fall under different tariff categories. They treat tariffs not as barriers, but as variables. And the companies that do this best gain an advantage. This is where scale becomes everything. Because smaller businesses don't have these options. They can't quickly move manufacturing from one country to another. They don't have teams of lawyers and logistics experts navigating trade classifications. They don't have the leverage to renegotiate supplier contracts. So when tariffs hit, they get squeezed. Margins shrink, costs rise, and many of them either raise prices more aggressively or lose out entirely. Meanwhile, large corporations absorb the disruption, adapt, and often come out stronger. So instead of leveling the playing field, tariffs often tilt it further, toward scale, toward consolidation, toward the companies that already dominate. And then there's the second layer most people never see, strategic pricing. Because tariffs don't just increase costs, they create cover. If a company's costs go up by 5%, it doesn't necessarily raise prices by 5%. It might raise them by 8% or 10%. Because consumers don't know the exact impact of the tariff. They just know prices are rising. So tariffs become an explanation, an anchor, a justification for broader pricing power. This is especially powerful in industries with limited competition. If multiple companies face the same tariffs, they all have a reason to raise prices. And because they move in the same direction, there's less pressure to undercut each other. Not explicit coordination, but parallel behavior. The result is higher prices across the board, beyond what the tariff alone would justify. Now take another step back, because tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. They trigger responses. When one country imposes tariffs, others retaliate. And this is where things escalate into trade wars. Country A taxes imports from country B. Country B responds with its own tariffs. Industries get targeted strategically. Agriculture, technology, manufacturing. Not randomly, but politically. The goal isn't just economic, it's leverage. And when that happens, entire sectors get pulled into the conflict. Farmers lose export markets. Manufacturers lose access to cheaper inputs. Supply chains fracture. Prices fluctuate. Uncertainty spreads. And governments step in to stabilize the damage. This is where another layer appears: subsidies. When tariffs hurt domestic industries, governments often provide financial support, bailouts, aid packages, tax relief. So now you have a loop. Tariffs raise costs. Retaliation causes damage. Governments spend money to offset that damage. And ultimately, that money comes from taxpayers. So the system starts to look very different from the original story. Instead of foreign companies paying, you have consumers paying higher prices, taxpayers funding subsidies, small businesses struggling, and large corporations adapting and, in many cases, benefiting. Because yes, some companies do benefit, especially those protected by tariffs. If imported goods become more expensive, domestic producers face less competition. They gain pricing power. They can increase margins. They can expand market share. And in some cases, they lobby to keep those protections in place indefinitely. This is where tariffs intersect directly with corporate influence. Because once an industry benefits from tariffs, it has a strong incentive to preserve them. Lobbying increases. Political messaging shifts. Tariffs get framed as essential, not temporary, as protection, not distortion. And removing them becomes politically difficult. Jobs get tied to them. Communities depend on them. Narratives build around them. And what started as a policy becomes an entrenched system. Now add one more dimension: time. Because the longer tariffs remain in place, the more the economy adjusts around them. Supply chains reorganize permanently. Investment decisions shift. Factories get built or shut down based on those policies. So even if tariffs are removed later, the effects don't fully reverse. The system has already adapted, and that creates inertia, which makes tariffs harder to unwind than to impose. There's also a psychological component. Tariffs feel external. They feel like something happening out there between governments and foreign entities, not something happening to you directly, which makes them politically effective. Because people resist visible taxes, but they tolerate invisible ones. And tariffs are one of the most effective invisible taxes that exist. They generate revenue. They shift behavior. They signal strength, all without triggering the same level of public scrutiny. But the deeper you go, the clearer the pattern becomes. Tariffs aren't just economic tools. They're instruments of redistribution. They move costs through the system in ways that are hard to trace. They shift burdens from visible to invisible, from direct to indirect. And they concentrate advantages toward companies with scale, toward industries with political influence, toward structures that can adapt quickly. At the same time, they diffuse costs across millions of consumers, across thousands of small businesses, across entire sectors that don't have the same leverage. And that imbalance is the core of the system. Now, think about how this connects to everything else. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, corporate pricing power, globalization. These aren't separate issues. They're interconnected, and tariffs are one of the mechanisms that link them. When prices rise, tariffs can be part of the cause. When companies report higher margins, tariffs can be part of the story. When industries consolidate, tariffs can be one of the pressures driving it. But because tariffs are framed so simply in public discourse, those connections often go unnoticed. And that's why the narrative persists. Because it's easier, cleaner, more politically useful. But it's not accurate. The reality is more complex, more layered, and more revealing. Because once you understand how tariffs actually function, the framing starts to look less like policy and more like positioning, less like protection and more like power. And that changes how you interpret everything that follows. The next time you hear that tariffs are being used to punish another country, ask a different question. Not who is being targeted, but who is actually absorbing the cost. Follow the path. From the border, through the importer, into corporate pricing, across supply chains, and finally to the consumer. Because that's where the system ends up, again and again. And once you see that pattern, it becomes hard to ignore. Because the bill was never really meant for them. It was just routed through them, on its way to you. On the bright side, if you stayed this long, please like and subscribe.